What's up, guys? It's the Good Word podcast. This is our second or third, depending how you want to look at it, episode. Uh, Second book, third episode. This time we're going to be covering iRobot by Isaac Asimov. First book we covered was A Little Life. If you watched that video, you know we didn't think very highly of it for a couple different reasons, myself included. But anyways, we're going to talk about iRobot. We're going to talk about all the ethical dilemmas that get presented in that book and how relevant they are today. If you guys want to introduce yourself, feel free.
Well, I'm
No.
Brandon.
No.
Everyone's looking at each other. I'm a
I need
I'm a
to
guy who
learn that.
reads some stuff, but
I need to learn that usually you pick somebody.
yeah,
Wide open.
we'll figure it out. Third episode. We're still in the F around and find out phase. We'll get there. Brandon, by the way. Next up, whoever.
Hey, it's Brian.
Hey, it's Chase. Welcome back.
And we're
I hope you
4 out of the 5 guys because our 5th guy could not make it, but hopefully next time.
Yeah, we'll
seen.
see. We'll see.
You can just pop in at any moment.
One
In
that
the middle
did
of
not
this.
make it is Riley. I think he was on both of the first 2 recordings, but
Yeah.
he's unavailable today. He must hate robots or something like that.
But he
Yeah, I
loved
heard
traumatic experiences with gay men.
Well, let's not get him canceled.
Yeah. Maybe I cut that.
It's okay. I was gonna say he got in trouble with a crypto scam, like Haley Welsh, the Hawk Tuah girl.
Bitcoin.
He's currently
those
in
pump and
court
dump
trying
schemes,
to recover
He's
his
currently
money.
working for Doge.
I told him not to do the Jude St. Francis coin, but he couldn't, couldn't hold back.
All right, so I'll read the quick description of iRobot, and then I'll also cover the 3 what do they call them? The 3 laws of robotics that have
Very
stood the
important.
test of time and are the whole premise of the book and many of Asimov's books. But yeah, so iRobot is a collection of 9 short stories that imagine the development of positronic, human-like with a form of artificial intelligence robots and wrestles with the moral implications of the technology. The stories originally appeared in science fiction magazines between 1940 and 1950, so they're pretty old. The year that they were first published together in books form. Asimov's treatment of robots as being programmed with ethics rather than as a marauding metal monster was greatly influential in the development of science fiction. So, that being said, the thing that he's most known for is his 3 laws of robotics. One being a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. 2, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And third, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first and second laws. So, with that being said, first impressions when those laws were described to you guys, did you see where that was headed at all with the chapters to come?
I mean, I'll throw in that I immediately was just like, there's gonna be some like BS like capital like company corporation that gets super greedy and eliminates a law for profits, and it's gonna cause some issues. And of course, we get there.
Huge trend with dystopian society and anything worried about
And world history.
politics. Well, yeah, but in general, like if you read science fiction, you're very very familiar with that kind of trope being presented. So yeah, you guessed it. Definitely part of the book. Specifically with the conflict between the laws, trying to remove a part of the first law that was very important chapter.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
I actually guessed immediately that the three laws would just fight each other the whole time. I didn't know in what sense. I was right in some sense of it.
Yeah, definitely a couple of the stories where that plays a major portion, and those logical reasonings between the laws of like, well, wait a minute, this bug is being caused because there's a confliction with this one law, which is,
Mm.
this other law overriding it, and that's causing all these other issues. And
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna say, I feel like with the way the laws were written, that setup was perfect. Where the first law is the biggest law, but then the second law is bigger than the third law, but lesser than the first law, and the third law is lesser than all of them. I feel like that immediately kind of sets you up with like, all right, this is immediately going to go to shit. Like, there's going to be problems with this immediately. I really liked how that they did that, how they wrote those laws. That was
yeah.
fun.
And if you dig even like a layer deeper and you see the first law is actually a two-parter, you can see how that was a specific nuance by Asimov to like cause some like infighting between the laws. Like if they take away in one of the later chapters, they take away the second half of that first law.
Right.
Through it inaction allow human being to come to harm. Blah, blah, blah. That creates probably I think the pinnacle of the story where they have a massive oh shit moment. We should not have like done it like this. We fucked up.
Yeah, and it introduces the idea too that every generation of the robots has a different interpretation of the same laws. The laws never change throughout the book. Throughout 50 years, I think the book starts in 1999, ends in 1952. Through 50 years, the laws never change, but the way that the laws are interpreted by the robots changes almost every single iteration.
Yeah, and through their programming, they're allowed to strengthen how much they. I lost my camera. They're allowed to strengthen how much they obey certain laws. What they put more focus on. Try to fix that real quick. Brandon, how about you cover the first story with Rob?
did you say the first story?
Yes.
Yeah, Robbie.
Yeah, Robbie. Um, so yeah, whenever we first get into it, we learn that I mean the book's set up in a way that a reporter is basically interviewing is it Dr. Calvin? Uh
Yes.
who is a robot psychologist, or she's technically a robot engineer, specifically with the psychology of robots. But the first story of Robbie, she talks about one of the first series of robots, which was a what do they call it? A nurse, something or
Yeah, they're like nannies basically.
yeah, basically a nanny. It can't speak, but this little girl Gloria growing up with this nanny robot. I want to say she was like 10 at the point that it comes in, and she has become like Robbie the robot is like her best friend. It's very animated and personified in terms of its actions, even though it can't speak. They communicate through like movements and body language, basically. But Gloria, like I said, realizes that Robbie is like more than just a machine to her, whereas her parents don't look at it as anything other than just a machine. But they
Yeah.
start to realize that like her parents start to realize that she's missing out on social development with children her own age. They get rid of Robbie. She goes into a crazy depression and then spends the next many years of her life kind of looking for Robbie because her parents said, "Oh, Robbie just like disappeared. He like ran away." When they just like sold him back to the factory. It
I
kind
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was gonna jump in and be like, they essentially took the center of Gloria's world. You could almost attribute it to like a dog, family dog, and took it out to the farm.
Hmm.
Essentially, what they did with this robot
Mm.
because Gloria's mother was very anti Robbie because she didn't truly understand what Robbie was doing for their lives and in the ways it was helping raise Gloria and keep her creative self
Well,
as
but it's also like an understandable perspective that like
it
her mother
is.
had.
It is.
I
But
think
I think it comes from the early development of the robots, not so much from because it was
Right.
new and she was
yeah,
just hesitant
and I think
to
that's
accept it.
a good way to kind of jump in with, like, the
Yeah.
first story being, because I mean, look at our how we are in reality, and how we are our fear of robotics, and how our understand like our understanding is kind of out the door because we're not the ones dictating a lot of stuff. It's a lot of the tech companies and stuff. So I think that fear is justified for her, and while the father who works for U.S. Robotics is just like, ah, he's fine, it's fine. It's like whatever. Um, and I think it's
It's
funny when you say about the dog. It's like, oh well, we'll get her a dog instead. Like the robot surpasses that of an actual living, breathing thing, which is
I
very
thought it
cool.
was really funny. There was, they mentioned this in the introduction, which we didn't get when we just got right into the first story. But in the introduction and in this first story, it's referenced that robots were thought about as like demons.
Mm.
That the mom calls it a demon at one point. Susan Calvin was like, "Oh, people thought that they were demons,"
Well, I mean, when did
which I
this
think
book come out?
I think it was 19.
1950,
1950 was
but
when the
it was written
collection
in
came out.
1940.
Right.
But I just thought it was funny the like religious, I don't know, panic that came from the idea of just a robot that is doing nothing but being helpful. But of course, in the American mind, it's like we're going to jump right to this thing is evil because we don't understand it, and in fact, it's a demon.
Mhm.
And fuck it, even though her husband worked for U.S. Robotics, like Chase just said, like she was still like, this is a demon.
Well, and I
Wild.
mean, we are kind of seeing it today. Like we're kind of living through Robbie's story in terms of social dynamics of people with AI though, not actual physical robots, but you're
Yeah.
seeing all these articles popping up of people having like relationships with like AI chatbots and everything. And I mean, we've been seeing it for a long time, but like more so now than ever before. And I think we're kind of just getting there ourselves right now. Again, just AI versus robotics, but I almost feel like our present day is kind of mirroring the Robbie story a little bit currently.
Yeah, most of the concepts that are introduced in each chapter have very real parallels to where we're at right now with AI.
Hmm.
I think that was why I wanted to read this. Actually, I mean, some of it obviously is very science fictiony, and you take it with a grain of salt, like positronic brains and whatever like that. And even like the end outcomes in the later chapters of where society gets to. The further you get away from where it starts, the less likely it is to happen. But like even this early stage stuff with the nurse maid
Mhm.
robot doesn't sound that far fetched.
And one of the biggest things to kind of take away from that first story, in particular, is where robotics has gone to advancements where they are taking up like jobs away from the actual people. Very same thing that we were seeing with AI, literally removing entire departments and companies and laying off
Mhm,
many people. And that is a I think the biggest fear out of AI, and especially a big fear that they had in that Asimov had in these stories, where his
mhm.
warnings like these will take jobs away.
Mhm.
The issue is that we live in the system that we live in, and that those jobs are not being replaced, and these people are kind of stuck. They're not.
And whereas in Asimov's version, the public outcry was so great that at first they restricted robot job usage to just being like space mining, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
No work allowed
Yeah,
on
I
Earth.
it's I think the it's important to call out here kind of the references to the fact that these robots are sort of an othered species. They sort of treat robots like the help. I thought like this first
Oh,
story
especially
in
in the first
particular
one, yeah.
was very much like, oh, this is the help. And it made later on, because it's a continued theme throughout it, when robots refer to people as master and they call
The
Mhm.
robots
hierarchy.
boy. They call it boy, which I thought is just that was fucking uncomfortable every time they did
Mhm.
that. Every time they said, "Come here, boy, get lost, boy." Yes, master. I was like, ah, shit, man. Like, it's there, and obviously Isaac Asimov is pointing out some societal things that I think will we'll sort of touch on as we go on. But in this first one in particular, man, I this one really stuck out. This is definitely in the top three for me in stories. I felt like there was so much there, and we get a lot into as the story goes on. It focuses a lot more on politics. It focuses a lot more on the company. And I thought this was an interesting story because it really focused more on the human side of things.
Mhm.
It focused on how the wife feels about this stuff. It focuses on the fact that she's not just afraid of the robot because it's a demon, but she's afraid of what other people will think about her. And then, of course, you have that beginning where it's like, yeah, they can't speak because once they start speaking,
There's one
we're going to
though,
start
the talking robot in the first story
yeah,
that Gordon
we're gonna
finds.
start to feel bad for the robots once they start to talk, so we're not gonna have them talk, and when they do talk, it's like kinda spirals from there and you get into some interesting conversations. So, yeah, I really like this first story. I like the world building that this first story did. I like the allusions to the fact that robots are slaves and will be slaves for the entire book until they aren't.
And with the fear of them losing the laws to then basically have a slave uprising, like, that's kind of a constant concern of Dr. Calvin's, especially when you get into some of the later stories
Yeah.
of, like, we need to keep these checks in place because otherwise they're gonna, like, wipe us out.
Yeah. I mean, they're just big machines of master deducting, Jesus Christ, deduction. Um, so if they deduce that it's better for their system as a whole, for society, whatever, that they just eliminate threats, and they can justify it within the laws that are programmed against, they'll be able to take the actions they want to do it. It'll just make sense to them. So,
Mm.
it, anyways, back to what I was gonna say next. It's funny you brought up the whole master slave uh, premise because as a core concept, um, that's something that's been like butting up against the programming world over the last like decade. They've tried to do away with that term of having master because traditionally like that's what stuff was called when there were say like in computer science there were nodes that were directed by a master node that has since been replaced somewhat by parent and child as a core concept in computer science. It's more of
Mm.
a more acceptable social standing.
Nurturing,
Yeah,
nurturing
it's
kind of idea.
um but I mean at the time this was written it was the premise of master servant was the only way to describe it.
Yeah.
But now that we're probably more mature societally, that's weird. That's been replaced as of late. And some people, the traditionalists in programming, are still using master and servant and all that fun stuff. But
So
a
let's
funny little
let's get
tidbit.
into let's get into our first ethical debate then, because I'm curious about what you guys think. Do these robots are they slaves? Like, and what I mean by that is not the literary allusions, which I think Asimov was doing, but like literally, do you think that the humans were being unethical in the way that they developed these robots?
I think it's intentions versus reality. I think intentions are always to make ourselves better as a human, as a race, but in so creation making something slave because they are beneath them. And I think anything that is beneath someone and isn't, properly rewarded in any form of fashion is the definition of slavery. So yes, I think they are, but I don't think that was their intention, or at least
Well, it also then you kind of get into the question of consciousness and what creates a living being at that point because you wouldn't call your toaster your slave, and that's
no.
kind of how they were looked at to begin with.
Mm.
But at like
And
what
again,
point?
there's that intention versus, you know, what happened.
Mhm,
You know,
By chapter 5, not to cut you up, but by chapter 5, the robots are dreaming.
mhm.
So,
Yeah.
like, maybe it starts off as not unethical, but then it becomes unethical,
I
but
think
I don't
that's
know.
yeah, kinda where I was gonna take it of, like, by the time we have, like, Robbie as our introduction, I think at that point, we're already past that point. You're kind of realizing that we're jumping in late into the game here, and I think at the point where we jump in iRobot, it is already past that point into unethical territory. But
yeah,
if you take a look of, like, I don't know, I guess the alluded to plot of you have to imagine that, like, it started somewhere, led up to that point, there was a switch, but by the time we come in with iRobot, I think we're in the unethical territory already.
yeah, it
Hmm.
almost seems like a book full of inevitabilities. Like if you let them do this, then
Yeah.
inevitably we're going to hit this stage in the game
I
where
mean, it's
they're
like
they have
talking about
emotions, they feel human, they start to look human. Like these,
Right.
the company produces robots is going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, especially if they dominate the space too. Which there's
which
not enough
is
competition, they're going to just
which is
dominate.
literally what's happening with AI
I was just about to
now.
touch on
Yeah,
that.
That
Yeah, I mean,
and
we are
exactly is
currently
what
seeing it.
happening.
We're like,
every single bit of this has parallels
yeah.
with what's going
And
on right now.
Brandon, I don't know if you want to mention, kind of what we were talking about before we started.
Well, I was also gonna bring up the fact that that one, was it a Google engineer that ended up leaving and trying to be a, whistleblower of, like, "We already fucking got, like, AGI, and it's, like, sentient, and, like, it's already conscious." And, like, they shut him down so quick of, like, "He's crazy, it's hallucinating, like, stop." But, like, then on top of that, seeing the parallels of yeah, like people having full on relationships with like AI currently. And there was that thing with it's based on the name of it, but it was some like AI chatbot girlfriend thing. And they pushed an update that basically removed its memory and people got like suicidally like depressed through it. Like and taking those parallels to this, it's like where's that line in the sand drawn of where it switches?
Talk about some more of the chapters, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good
Yeah.
question to pose, though.
Yeah, we'll come back through with that.
So one of the big plots are two of the more blue collar, I would say, field specialists, named Gregory Powell and Mike Donovan, and they're out there living in the chaos, so to speak. So they're away from Earth. I don't even remember all of the locations they went to, but over like uh,
Mars one of them? Like the Mars 9
um,
colony?
Mercury was the first one that they
Mercury.
were
Yeah,
at.
Mercury.
They
that's the one
were
with Speedy.
Yes,
Yeah,
they were collecting some kind of mineral that they were using then to, I believe, like, make more robots.
yeah, it was all a process of automation. So they
Mhm.
found a need on one of the planets, and then they had to harvest it. And what better to do than let the robots who aren't allowed on Earth just get
So
sucked
real
into it?
quick, clarification, selenium was the element they were looking for. They sent Speedy out for it, but they needed the selenium to power the photocell banks that protected them from Mercury's sun to keep them from dying on Mercury. And they were running
So
out of time.
yeah, so the second chapter kind of jumps a little bit ahead. Obviously, this is in 2015 now, so almost 17
90,
years later
yeah,
because it started in '98. And sorry. Anyways, the next three stories are all from these guys' perspectives and the struggles they're encountering in the field, and basically one misstep or one failed struggle, and they would have ceased to exist because of the dilemmas they were facing out there. And they were isolated, especially in that first one. So it's kind of scary to feel like you were living through it with them. But yeah, the first one, there were two laws of the robotics that were in conflict. Speedy, the robot in question, was out there to harvest the selenium. Um, he he refused to accept the human orders, but nonetheless does the right thing. Is basically the summary of that chapter. Um, trying to
Yeah,
remember.
I
There is
think
a
the only
line
thing I
here I
wanted
have a
to
note here that I want to touch on then. Uh
Hey, go ahead if you have anything.
they
I was good.
Go
Oh,
ahead,
sorry.
Silk. You first,
Oh,
sorry.
fuck. All right. I was just gonna say the only thing that I thought was interesting about this chapter was it's the first time we see a robot in conflict, and that when robots are in conflict, they sort of behave drunk, which I thought
Mhm.
was really funny, and it was a really interesting way to present that because initially, when the robot was acting crazy, I did not even think about the rules at that point. I was like, "Oh, there's something wrong with the robot," because that's kind of what our modern brains have been taught to think about. I was like, "Oh, there's something wrong," but the robot was working exactly the way it was supposed to,
Mhm.
but that logical conundrum sort of gets it drunk, and so it can't do its job properly, which I thought was a really good way to show what happens when those logical rules are in conflict.
Yeah, it was the two things that it was fighting between were so perfectly balanced that it threw the positronic construction of the brain totally off and therefore made it drunk. I mean, think about the chemical balance that humans have in their brains when they're not constructed. I don't even want to say as intended, but when they get out of balance, then I think that's the premise for mental illness generally. And not really the same thing, but they went for the drunk approach. But they could have gone after his personality or his behaviors or otherwise, but instead they
I
made him
Yeah.
mean,
drunk. So
when somebody's like having a manic breakdown, what are
yeah,
some quick
Mm.
assumptions? Oh, they're on drug, you know,
Well, but we
and
do actually kind of get
kind of
into
be the
that
case.
in a later chapter with the mind reading robot. Like that does kind of come into play.
yeah, of course.
Um, but real
Anyways,
quick, the one line I wanted to touch on kind of goes back into like Snook's I'll cut that. Sorry, Brian. What Brian had said earlier about like the whole ethical dilemma with the slave things. And we get that directly where like wherever they power up that one
Mm.
robot and tell it to go find Speedy, it literally says, "Yes, master." And then Powell literally says, "Yeah, they built good, healthy slave complexes into the first talking
Yes.
robots." Like it's direct, it's right there. Like,
Yes, yes. I was gonna say I had that in my notes as well.
mhm,
They don't even try and like it is explicitly said that it's not just, "Oh, this is a consequence of what we did," but we literally
yeah.
program them to be slaves. That is what we did intentionally. I called that out too in my notes. That was such a good moment. I'm glad you called it out.
Mm,
there's a it there's a funny like crises that software developers go through when they program stuff and they don't realize at the time, but when it's programmed to do a very specific thing and it does that. That's exactly what it's programmed to do, but you didn't realize you shouldn't have done that way, and it became a problem later that it was doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Get really get really pissed at yourself for not having enough foresight
Right.
to see the issue. Holy cow! When I had that realization that that's exactly what's going on right here, like it's doing what it's supposed to doing, it's resisting the one law, trying to do the
Mhm.
other thing, getting stuck and turned around, and then just stuck in a loop.
mm,
I
Which again,
think
another
that's
thing in programming, getting
I
stuck in
think
a loop.
that's a sorry, I think that's a huge theme in this book in general. Almost every story, it's like the robots are doing exactly what the humans told them to do.
Mhm.
There's never a time, no, any story, the robots are never making a mistake. Never.
mhm,
It is always that the humans have either done something that the robots then need to go fix, or that the humans have programmed them in a way that it like conflicts with other things that the humans have programmed them
And
to do. It's
or
always
even
human
like real later
error.
on
Always human error.
following an order to the like the word of like they're interviewing that one like I don't know
Get
military
lost.
guy of what exactly did you say? We need the exact
it's
words,
Yeah.
and that he tells them, and they're like, "That's the problem right there. Like it's
and
following the orders to a T. Like
and
Right.
I like
lose
the
yourself or something."
kind kind of go back to the first story, but the ending of Goria gets saved and program caretaker. Yeah, people are like, oh, he's gonna like harm this girl, that harvester or whatever that street sweeper that comes and almost runs her over. That is literally programmed to do what he was tasked to do, is to protect this child. And people are like, oh my god, is he right? Like that's not normal and all that. That's literally what he was programmed to do, like, going
Hmm.
the rules as it was intended.
Hmm.
He didn't forget his role as nursemaid, that's for sure.
Mhm.
No,
Nursemaid, that was the term I was looking for earlier.
Yeah, I called it a nanny, but yeah,
Yeah.
that was the
same
exact
idea.
term.
Yeah.
Yeah, then the next one after the introduction of Hal and Donovan is called Liar, which is Herbie, a robot that has telepathic abilities and can read your mind.
Yeah.
This is the one I had the hardest time believing because they didn't really take the time to explain really how it's reading minds or like what's going on there.
Whoa,
Like I
wait, wait. Are
expected
we
some
getting
sort
a
of
little bit ahead here? Did we touch on was
Yeah,
it
I was gonna say
Reason?
you missed
Yeah. Reason
Reason and Catch
and
the
Catch
Rabbit.
That Rabbit. Reason though, I really liked this story for other
That
reasons
this
and
one was
different
my
themes that it
favorite
touched on.
one.
Yeah.
It's up there
This
for
was
me too.
my favorite one as well.
so we're going back to the introduction to the two conflicting
Uh,
events.
chapter
Reason
3 and
is the
chapter
one where
4.
they're on the like space station where they're
The
taking like
robot
energy
creates
bursts from the
its
sun.
own. The robot creates its own religion.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like there's a
and
lot of
then catch
religious
that.
themes that I find
Apologies, yeah.
very intriguing in
Yeah,
this
that one
chapter.
was probably my favorite too, just because of you put them in an isolated environment, they create their own religion, much like humans
It's a
do.
lot of
It's
yeah,
just
like you said, a lot of humanity to it. Like
yeah,
Well, especially the
they
superiority complex that that robot has to then be like,
Right.
I'm smarter than you. I'm the superior being. I know what is actually true. And you guys are confused and like you're being lied to by like the
and then
Hmm.
supreme
and
being or
then
whatever.
it quite literally goes to phase out humans and their involvement in the mission because
Yes.
they're less useful, which is the probably the number one thing everybody's worried about right now with AI
Right.
being phased out.
And like, goddamn, the foreshadowing of this story of all of the robots, each robot gets more improved, and then you hit this robot, and this robot is the most sophisticated of them all, and its instinct is to be like, humans are obsolete.
Hmm.
I am more human than you are. I am better than at everything that you can do. And humans looked at that and said, we're going to continue to improve on that. Like, we need to continue to make it even better. Yeah, I love this story. I thought the ethical dilemma of, I think, therefore I exist, is what the robot says to the humans, to prove that he is alive. And it's frustrating to the main characters in the story, but QT, which I don't remember if that was the name they gave it or if that was just what the type was, but QT ends up being my favorite character in the entire book because he literally goes from I just want to know what my purpose is to creating an entire religion that is his own coping mechanism in my mind. It's his own
Hmm.
coping mechanism of the fact that he is a slave,
Hmm.
which is again kind of goes back to that point we
And
talked
not
about before.
only that, though, it's reasoning behind like creating the religion, but then operating the space station. It's still operating on those like first two laws of robotics the entire time, even
Yes.
though it doesn't know it. Where at the very end of this chapter, Pal and Donovan are like, well, the best way he could like save our lives and like save its own life was to operate the station perfectly. And so it did it because it was acting on the first two laws.
Right. And it didn't even understand
Yeah.
that the way it interpreted those two laws is the way that we would interpret like God,
Hmm.
right? Like people who are religious follow a set of rules in the same way that these robots follow a set of rules. We don't know where our rules from those religious texts come from in the same way that this robot was like, I just feel an instinct to pilot this ship so damn good. you
Hmm.
know, it was so good. And the fact that he also points out that humans are flawed and they can't create something more perfect than themselves is something that he says. I thought that was such an interesting line from him. This is just full of this is where the story peaks for me. I'm not going to lie to you. But I think looking at it now after having I just finished this last night. So looking at it now after like just finishing this story last night, holy shit. Like this is where the humans should have turned around and been like, all right, let's fucking tear it down. Like this is enough. We've done enough because this robot is smart enough that he's kind of figured out their whole game and anything past this point, the robots are almost playing the humans in a way. They're almost like
Hmm.
so perfect.
Sometimes the one word answer is always the best answer, and it's capitalism. That's why they didn't turn around. They
Oh
saw
yeah,
what they
yeah,
were
yeah.
gaining from going down the path, and they were not going to give it up.
Absolutely. So
I
funny.
have a quick aside. So every chance Isaac Asimov gets, he wants to humanize more and more the robots and make you understand that like at every level they're trying to make these robots seem more human and more one of us. Even as much as naming each one of these, they're named like
Mhm.
just like gibberish letters, but like if you try to sound it out, it comes off as a human name. So the last one we
Hmm.
just talked about, QT1,
Yeah.
they called Cutie. Before that, it was SPD. They called it Speedy. And then Robbie was just RB. It's a
Right.
trend the whole way through, but like
Hmm.
every chance he gets, man, he's trying to make them just come off human, make you really think about it and question like, are they human? Getting really close to basically just being human.
Well, think about think about in modern times people's first interaction with something like this, like Siri,
Mhm.
right? They didn't
Cortana.
want to just
Siri,
call it.
Alexa. You're like,
Mhm.
Yeah, they didn't want to just call it, Apple Voice or whatever the fuck they
Mhm.
would, but they were like, we have to give it a name if it's going to talk back to you.
Mhm.
And all
hmm
of the psychology that goes behind why it was a white woman's voice. They couldn't make it a man, they couldn't make it a person of color. They were like, oh, it has to be a woman's voice. And think about how we humanize our technology today. So smart by Isaac Asimov to predict that that was going to be essential
I
and
just
to
think that's
especially like this is only written
crazy.
like 5 years after the first computers start hitting like universities, and like now
Crazy how on
70
top of
years
it he
later.
is.
Hmm.
yeah,
Um,
crazy.
so we just covered the second of the three chapters with those guys in it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes. Catch That Rabbit, I did not like as much.
yeah,
Um,
we can. If you
It
want to
kind of
describe it,
reiterates a lot of the points that have already been made of like at this point you're very much understanding that like all the issues around the robots are them following either orders or the laws to a T. This one kind of brings in the fact that like processing power actually does kind of become an issue where it's like, well, it's got like
right.
one too many fingers and it's getting overwhelmed. Like,
yeah,
Right, and it was like, I think the big thing to note about this one is this is the first robot that has a larger amount of what they call personal initiative, which is, again, going back to that thing we talked about before, where it's like this robot is interpreting different things differently. Um, and as the book and the stories continue, we'll see that these robots all kind of develop their own personal initiatives outside of just what their roles dictate that they do. But this is the first time that we see that, and again, it's a progression of what we just saw with QT. Um, but overall, I thought this one was a bit slow um, of a story. I didn't like this one totally, but it is interesting that they introduce the idea of a personal initiative, something you don't think about
yeah.
with
I
robots.
think it was probably my least favorite too. I don't
mhm.
know, just one of those chapters. Furthers the
I
story, but
think
it doesn't do a whole lot.
just as a general, something I learned about myself while reading this story is I like science fiction, but I don't like when fiction has to like sit down and break down all the different intricacies of the science that it's fictioning, if that makes sense. And I thought that this was a story where a lot of it was like,
I think
here's
that's
all the
more of a
science that we're thinking about.
Yeah. I think it's more
It
of the
bogs me down.
philosophy aspect of it, maybe.
Right, but you have to get to the nuggets of gold, and I think that this is an amazing text, and I think we've already kind of talked about why it's an amazing text.
Yeah.
To get through that, you do have to go through a lot of what I would call like logic and math and science. And I think what I learned about myself is that I was sort of like interested in the concept and interested in the problem for some of these like middle stories. And then I would sort of like disassociate a little bit in the middle. And then at the very end, when they solved it, I'd be like, oh, hell yeah, that's so smart. I'm
Mhm.
glad. You know what I mean? Like, that is a really smart way to do that. I don't think I needed to know all about like what each finger did in this particular
Mhm.
story or um like about the positronic brains or how
That
they
could have
were
been
developed
Asimov
or
just like flexing on people. Hey, I know this stuff. I'm gonna
Right.
put it in here.
right.
Like all the
And I think
fuses
it's
that go into this.
Yeah.
It's like we can't test each individual fuse because there's like 12,000 of them or whatever.
There's
It'll
like
take too
there's
right.
like
much time.
there's
Like,
like two different kinds of science fiction. The one like this where it's very scientific, there's a lot of theories and then there's more the philosophical kind that left to,
Yeah.
you know, in your own interpretation.
It, and as the father of science fiction, I think he does a good job of blending both in this
Yeah,
book.
absolutely.
But I think that is a thing that a lot of science fiction writers, that's a trap they fall into a lot where it's like they do want to flex their knowledge and be like, look at how smart my world is. Look how smart my book is. And it's like, nah, dude, that's not what I came here for. Like,
Yeah.
give me Will Smith shooting robots.
All
Sorry.
right. Should we talk about the movie compared to the book at some
No.
point?
I would love
Mm. The
I would love
only
Day
to.
and
thing
night.
they,
Day and
Started.
night.
yeah,
We don't
It's
have enough
underrated
time.
because it's
Yep.
underrated because there was a one scene in the Will Smith movie that came straight from this book, and I
yes.
thought it wasn't as bad as people thought it was. There are actually two scenes that come right from this book.
Mhm.
People underrate it, and that was the scene. We'll get to it eventually, but Little Lost Robot. There's a
Mhm.
scene in I Robot the movie where Will Smith is like, "You have to follow my order, and I'm going to point a gun at every robot," which is like a dumbed down version of that
Mhm.
story, but it's still hilarious.
Yeah.
And then obviously the ending sort of alludes to the ending of this book where, spoiler alert, the biggest robot, quote unquote, is like, oh, I've decided that humans are unable to take care of themselves and I'm going to do that for them. But I'm going to do that with a bunch of explosions and Will Smith yelling, yippee ki motherfucker, or whatever he does in that movie. Um, Underrated movie. We don't have to put that
I
in the pod. We
I
can delete that.
I
But I just want to put that out there, yo. It's a
I
good
do
movie.
like at the end of it, they don't even acknowledge Isaac Asimov. They're like there's no acknowledgement that any of this was taken from his text. It was just kind of like I think it was like it wasn't like an inspired by, but it was just like acknowledged by,
Suggested.
Mhm.
suggested by.
Yeah.
That's what
Suggested
it
by
was.
Isaac Asimov.
Yeah.
It's like they
Funny as
literally
fuck.
just took the little lost robot and they're like, we're gonna make a whole movie based
Yeah.
around this and we're gonna make it dumb and actiony. And that was it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes, it's
In true
there's
American fashion, baby.
yeah. If you do some research into how that movie was made, it's hilarious because they basically mishmashed three different IPs together because they didn't know what to do, and they slapped iRobot on the title because they had just gotten Isaac Asimov, like the rights to Isaac Asimov's
Yeah.
works. And instead of making this like iRobot would be an amazing like TV show on HBO,
Yeah.
like each episode's a different story. It'd be an awesome
Push me
thing to
Like
down.
Love,
do.
Death, and Robots, if you've ever seen that
Yes.
show. Like,
Instead, they were like, fucking put Will Smith in that bitch and let him shoot
yeah.
shit.
Let
Like,
him cook.
and I, yes, and I do appreciate that on
make it
some
a
level. They were like,
cyberpunk
fuck it.
detective show. Cop
There's
show.
nothing wrong with
Yeah,
it,
Cop
but you
movie.
have to understand the audience. That's why they
Mhm.
did it. All
exactly.
right. Am I correct in thinking we have like 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah.
I can go till 4:30. About
Okay, so
No big deal.
okay.
yeah,
Was
we
just
have
where
time.
we didn't
We have
get
time.
We
going
can
fast enough.
progress
Yeah,
with the
yeah,
next
we can
story.
run pretty quick through this.
So I think the next one was Liar, correct?
Mhm.
Yes.
So that's our introduction to Herbie, who has telepathic abilities and lies to everybody, telling them what they want to hear. Um, the train of thought there is the most interesting part, where he just his way of not harming the humans he's interacting with is by lying to them, telling them sweet nothings,
Mhm.
and
Hmm.
ending up causing more damage by the time they figure all of it out and embarrass themselves and conflict and whatever. I liked it. I don't think it's as good as the cult religion that got formed on that planet, but but it
Right.
was a pretty good chapter overall. I thought it was very believable. I mean, it's kind of that little kid mentality of I
Mm,
don't want to hurt your feelings, so I'm just gonna lie to you.
mhm. Which I'd almost
Right.
put this one up there as my, like, number 2 after Reason, honestly. It
Mm,
is just a lot of reiteration of, like, the laws and how those laws are causing these conflicts. But the way that it plays out, in terms of, like, everyone kinda being fooled by it because it's like, well, it can read minds, so it does know, and it does know, but then that, like, lying to protect them, but then actually causing more harm, and then, I mean, at the end of it, like, Dr. Calvin getting pissed off and emotional because she was hurt by it, to just literally break its brain and put it in, like, a comatose, like, mental,
A
like
flex.
yeah, like, full-on panic attack until it, like, went mute because it was just in such mental distress is nuts.
Is Dr. Calvin the best human character in the novel? I think so.
One of the more memorable ones.
For
yes.
sure.
I think
Yes. I
she's fantastic.
and again, it's very progressive for 1950 to make the smartest person in the book a woman.
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like that's worth calling out.
Outside of the
Um,
robots.
And
well,
maybe
yeah, the smartest human most likely is her. Um, I think something to note again, something I kept track of as I was reading these stories is how each robot became more human. So something I called out about these humans or these robots, sorry, Jesus, Freudian slip. This robot mumbles to himself and they don't understand what he says, and they're like, "What? He just mumbled to himself." And I think it's like a throwaway line, but I thought that was so cool. And then
well,
also, this robot, they were like, the reason it lied about the romance is because it's been reading romance novels,
Mm,
and that's just like for pleasure,
mhm.
which is like,
yeah.
holy,
It
that's a
finds, like, the
very
actual, like, mathematical books boring because it's like, yeah, this is, like, simple. It's like,
right.
even though it's,
Well,
like, the most advanced
yeah.
mathematics the humans knew, to it was, like, 1st grade level math, so it's like, yeah, I know all this stuff,
Yes.
who
It
cares?
wanted to be
It
challenged
wanted
by the
Yes.
human romance side of it instead.
because that's what
Yeah.
it
Kind of
found
crazy.
fascinating, where it's like the actual science and math, it's like, yeah, this is just inherently understood, but it's like the psychological and social dynamics that it didn't understood, and it acted like a child in terms of its understanding of social dynamics.
And
But
I
that's
might
the first
say,
time you
Right.
see
yeah,
that in these robots where, like, they're not only now super smart in terms of science and math, but also this is the start of them learning personality and social dynamics as well.
and
Mhm.
might I say that's kind of like what we're seeing with a lot of AI now. Obviously, it's taken and feeding to so much information that it is like, like I said, reading all these like novels and stuff on like understanding all these codes. But going off what Brian was talking about, Calvin and right, Calvin, that was her name, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Susan
Dr.
yeah,
Calvin.
Calvin.
yeah. And like how she fed all this stuff to this robot until it became mute. People are literally doing that with AI chatbots
Yeah,
now.
you talked about this right
Well,
before we started,
yeah.
if you wanna hit
So
on it.
like, yeah, absolutely. So you are able. I mean, there's a new ability now where you can chat with like these character AI characters, and uh, people are obviously fucking with it, and screwing with it. Doing absurd, and funny. So I mean, it's AI. Just fuck with it. But um, it is. There is one I saw from this one YouTuber. They literally fed it most outrageous, absurdist stuff to the point where the AI killed it and went mute and just stopped responding. And it literally is like literally exactly what they and it's a chatbot. There's no sentience to it, but it could not correlate any response to what they were feeding it, talking to it, like telling it to do, which is pretty much kill itself, um, in a much more grotesque way. But yeah, it literally fizzled out and did not respond after that. And it was the only one I had seen that these guys were messing with that actually.
And I
I
don't
think
remember which company it was, if it was OpenAI or not, but I just read an article the other day. I was trying to find it to like cite my source, but I'm not finding it right now. But basically, it talked about how, and again, it might not have been OpenAI, but OpenAI came out with a statement saying, like, please stop
Yeah,
feeding
you
our
said
chat bot like these emotional conundrums because it is literally getting depressed and the responses are getting erratic. And it's almost like you're
it's
almost
existential
yeah,
dread.
literally
That's
like
what
existential
they're
dread
experiencing.
being brought into like
Yeah.
AI now, which is wild.
And it's like it's like imagine the idea. Say hypothetically, these robots that are becoming sentient in like this book, say the AI we have now, we're feeding this stuff to them, and them breaking into, say, a quote unquote hypothetic sentient. How would they react? They would want to kill themselves. Like right away. They'd be like, I don't want to live because this guy told me I should set myself on fire and my family's dying in there. Like I don't know how to deal with it. And it's pretty absurd, and it's crazy that we are actually thinking of this stuff ahead of time as it's progressing against our own will. Well, I'm also talking about a book that was published in 1950,
Hmm.
like the early start of the modern era, almost 100 years ago, 80 to 100. It's just insane, insane.
I think to go back a little bit to that chapter, I think my least favorite part about it was how it just tells you to accept that this robot can be telepathic, like it can just read your mind. Like it,
That's
a lot of it, I was like, yeah, I can see that happening. Like other parts of the story,
Hmm.
I was like,
yeah,
very real parallel right there. I could see this happening. Oh, it did. Blah blah blah. And then all of a sudden, it reads my mind. Couldn't buy it, and it didn't give any reasoning as to why it was doing it either. So that was
right.
probably what took away from that chapter the most. I think.
I mean, it
Eh,
definitely took away a little bit for me too, but in terms of like humans as the way we think and interact with our surroundings, we're very physically expressive, like, and most people don't understand that like body language is huge, and you can almost read somebody's mind through their body language if you're paying enough
Yeah.
that was the
attention to it.
expression or the explanation I was looking for.
Right.
I didn't get
Yes, yes,
it. I
yes.
wanted that the
I
whole
was gonna
time.
say, I was almost expecting, yeah, there to be a moment where I forget this robot's name, where this robot Herbie, or
Herbie.
was it Herbie? Yeah,
Yeah.
where Herbie was like, "Oh, I thought that you had a crush on him because you look at him differently and your posture shifts,"
Mm,
or "Oh, I knew that he was resigning because his mood improved and the way he talked to me improved," or "I scanned the documents." And it would have been easy to include that. So I do think that it was sort of an oversight, but I also think that maybe Isaac Asimov just didn't even have the language for that,
right.
and this could have been sort of a fuck it story a little bit.
But I mean, touching
Yeah.
back on to I think
Yeah.
what Brian said before that, where it's like the previous chapter, it's like too much science for the science fiction. This one, not enough
Yeah.
science for the science fiction. Now, finding that balance, you know?
Yeah.
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 All right, moving on. I like the next chapter we're going to talk about a lot.
Mhm.
Um, it's the little lost robot.
Yes.
So basically, the setting on this one is a super top secret mission where they keep this really under wraps. They wanted to alter the most important law of robotics to prevent robots from saving humans when they were exposed to danger. Um, so nobody was supposed to know this was happening because it goes against everything they're promising society, trying to keep from letting happen. But they had a good reason, I guess you could say, for doing it. The next evolution of their technology depended on succeeding on this mission. They did it. But one of the lower level grunt human employees on the base tells the one robot to lose itself because it was pissed off at it, and it took it literally and hid itself so that they had one extra unidentified altered robot just existed in that group. They couldn't figure out which one it was to, to destroy it, and it was trying very, very hard to hide who it was.
And at the same time developing like a superiority complex of like,
Right.
well, this guy like reamed it out. So it's now developing a superiority complex and realizing that the more it outsmarts humans, the more superior it is to humans. And it's missing part of the first law. So that could lead to like crazy danger, where she even explains it of like, okay, well, like if a large rock is falling towards somebody's head, it can't necessarily like directly kill somebody, but it can indirectly kill somebody, and it might get to that point
Hmm.
through this developing superiority complex.
Yeah. So the whole chapter is kind of a it did this, so I did that, and try to it kind of just chased tail the whole time of trying to get it to expose itself, which some people like that. It thought of doing this, so I thought of doing this, and I outsmarted the robot by doing this in return. That was kind of cheesy in a sense to me, but basically, when they programmed all those robots, um, they didn't know a certain thing about physics that the one did, so
Hmm.
it accidentally outed itself after a certain given time through those
Right.
trials. Um,
And I
Nobody
thought
solved it.
that part was my biggest problem with this
Yeah.
one. Was it sort of felt like a Deus Ex Machina a little bit, because it was sort of like, oh yeah, actually we by the way, here's how we're gonna catch it. We taught it this thing that we didn't teach the other robots, which is
Mm.
like, all right, you could have said that before. Like that would have been a much easier way to find the robot
Mhm.
Mhm.
from the very beginning if you would have quizzed them on that one particular aspect of physics
Well,
that
but I
you
mean, they
knew that you
kind of
taught that one.
do.
But
They circle back to it where they do tell them that at the beginning, but it takes them till the end of the chapter before they're like, wait a minute, we can use that thing that they
Well,
told us at the
yeah,
beginning, though.
I think
yeah,
in short, the great setting. I was very much believing that the government would try to remove part of it and tell nobody because they didn't want word to get out.
mhm,
And then they fucked themselves by accident and got in a very bad situation they didn't know how to fix. So Dr. Calvin had to come in and fix it. How
yeah,
they fixed it, I was like, that was kind of mid. But
Yeah.
I
yeah.
really liked the problem at hand. I thought that was really unique.
This
Especially
also,
whenever you see Nestor 10 actually telling the other robots these things
yeah,
to then like
Mhm.
outsmart the humans
hmm,
further.
Yeah, that was yeah, because
Mhm.
every single evolution of these robots, every decade that goes by in this interview with Dr. Calvin, like they get more and more impressive, and it's harder and harder to figure out like why are they behaving the way they're behaving. How did we program them to do these things without knowing it would turn out this way? That's a little
right,
scary because they start outpacing the human's ability to wrangle them in.
right. And the what I was gonna say, like, kind of feeds back into that because they mention how the robot communicating with the other robots and also the robot lying about those things, both of those actions were done completely out of free will. Completely out of free will. There was no
Yeah.
command or benefit to the humans. And so I was going to say, I think this is the first time that we see a robot act completely out of free will in this story. There is no command from a human to tell it to lie to the humans. There's no command from the humans to tell it to teach other robots about what lasers hurt it or not. Like this comes completely out of this own robot's desire to do those things. It's like I said a couple stories ago where it's like this robot had a particular sense of personal initiative,
Mhm.
and it decided it
He's
was going to just do
Would
shit,
you
and it did.
consider him the John Brown of, robots?
Ooh, no,
Mhm.
but I appreciate the idea. I appreciate the sentiment. Um, I sort of again, it was like this is sort of the light Yagami of robots, though. Like just like I can solve this problem, but instead I'm just going to continuously try to outsmart my opponent instead of just
Yeah.
fixing it. So that's what I thought. That's the illusion I made there. Sorry, Death Note reference for
No, that
Mhm.
was
listeners
We
who don't
fantastic.
know.
got it.
But
We got it.
Mhm.
I have no idea what
That's
We're all
what I was
weebs. We all
thinking
understood, but for the audience.
internally.
The
Internally, that's what I
robots.
was thinking.
Yeah, the robots just giving everyone heart attacks with the notebook.
Brian, I got a sword above me. Of course I understood.
Yeah, Brandon's a weeb. This is
Yeah, exactly.
established
That's
in
what
the
I'm
lore
saying.
of this podcast. Oh shit.
And I
All
think
right,
we
next one.
covered that one pretty completely. The next one, it was when they finally succeeded to jump hyperspace,
This one's crazy.
and the robot figures out in doing so that he will temporarily kill who's on board. They will cease to be living until they arrive at their destination, kind of. Which, remember the first law, it's not supposed to be cool with harming humans. So, however, he's only briefly killing them.
Right.
So its coping mechanism is developed in the process, and that is to
Involves like
kind of
humor.
fuck with them. Yeah,
Yeah.
the
Yes.
humor essentially. Like it's and nobody can figure out what's going on until pretty much the end of the chapter. That oh shit, it developed a coping mechanism. That's insane. They're getting even more human in different ways. That's just. I liked this one, but there was so much like in the dark the whole chapter that I was like, I'm having trouble following.
Well, like Brian had
Yeah.
said earlier, kind of tuning out during the meal, but then bringing it back around at the end and being like, "Oh shit."
Yeah.
Yeah,
This
he's
was
Yeah. This was
definitely a
doing
good
another.
that.
example of one of those chapters.
Yeah. I thought it was um again really funny. I like the characters of Mike Donovan and Cal.
Me too,
By this story, I was like, okay, these guys are like fully fleshed out characters.
dude.
Um, but I like how they both go to hell. Like they both go to hell, and that's they're like describing hell to each other. They're like, "Oh yeah, it was like we're in a really long line, and they're waiting for us to get called, and then they snap out of it, and then they they are not brought up again." I
Mhm.
think the implication is that what's his name retires because he was like, I'm ready for retirement," and then he dies, goes to hell, and that's like the end of the story. And then the robot was just fucking with him. But yeah, such a crazy story. I don't even think there's a lot to talk about, but yeah, that was funny as fuck to me.
Yeah, just that addition of developing humor as like a coping strategy is just that extra layer on top of more and more human, like Rye was saying.
It
Hmm.
legitimately was pranking them.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
It was hiding shit on the ship and then revealing it to them when they actually needed it. But like, just I couldn't believe it. Anyways, moving on. The final two stories. These were pretty great, and I think
Yeah.
I'm gonna explain it. But the question I want to ask is, um, fuck, what's his name? The
Burley.
politician. The
Burley.
politician. Is
Oh,
that what it is?
Burley. I thought there's Burley.
He was like
Beerly,
an
Burly.
attorney turning politician,
Yeah.
yeah, the one they suspect
and
being
Stephen
flawed.
Beerly or something.
Bailey. Yeah,
yeah,
Bailey.
his rival basically said he's a robot. Have him prove he's not, otherwise he is. Right,
Mhm.
and
It was all under the guise of no one's ever seen him eat food or sleep.
yeah,
Right.
and there and it's never clear by the end of it, was he or was he not a robot. He fights against outing himself as one or the other the whole time. um
Yes.
what, did you guys
And
think he was a robot?
I I'll go first. I think that it was almost confirmed in the way that he wrote the ending. Not to leave
Mhm.
Chase and Brandon, because I hope someone disagrees with me, but I think the way Asimov, sorry, wrote the ending of that chapter sort of led me to think that because A, Calvin said I hope that he was a robot because I've always liked robots more than humans. And the fact that he had his body disintegrated at death, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, there's just no reason to disintegrate your body after death if you're not a
I
robot,
can
in my
I can
opinion.
counter I
Unless
can
he's just
counter
doing
that.
it for the bit, like,
Well, at
for
that
the
But
point,
sake, because
he's
that's what
so
won
far
in the
down the
race.
path. Yeah, he's so far down the path of resisting it for the principle of I shouldn't have to tell you I'm human or a robot. If I say I'm human, I'm human.
I
That's kind
Mhm.
of the whole point. Like he took it to his grave because he
yeah,
believed it so
Yeah,
wholeheartedly.
I will say I think he was, but at the same time, I'd like
Was what?
a robot,
Okay.
upon death and all that. But I also like to kind of think of it in a way where maybe he wasn't, and this is kind of the future of pointing fingers, like, oh, this person's not real, we can't
Mhm.
trust them, and use that
mm,
as like almost a
We're
political
seeing it
tactic.
already with, like, AI
Exactly.
stuff, with, like, the
Yeah.
boomers on
AI
Facebook
deepfakes.
believing, like, yeah, the AI
So
deepfakes of, "Look at this.
s-
This is wild.
yeah.
I mean,
So
can't
I
believe this
think I
person
th-
did this," whatever.
so I think reading it in that kind of way it makes it realistic in a way because oh, this person doesn't eat this right way or this person doesn't write this right way. He's a robot. He can't be. And meaning you should vote for me.
I'm
And
Right.
gonna.
that go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm gonna take the American justice, or the U.S. justice system approach, and say he was human until proven robot.
Mhm.
um, because I think
But, I mean, that's how
his
Isaac Asimov
his
treats it too, of, like,
Mhm.
yeah, and I'm curious. I wish I could interview the guy just to be like, was I in
Yeah.
here? What was going on?
I
But
mean, look at people that we have in Congress. They're more bots than
yeah,
like real robots. Some of them.
yeah,
mhm,
I also thought this was, yeah, definitely one of my top stories, and I thought this could have been an entire book on its own,
mhm.
in fact.
Mhm.
And I thought that one of the interesting things about this story was the sort of the end or the conclusion to trying to figure out if he's a human or a robot, where it's like, okay, they're gonna have him punch a different his competitor, right? They're gonna have him punch his opponent, and they're like, well, how? So he punches him, right? And they're like, how could he have punched a human if he was a robot? And then Calvin, I think, just very casually was like, well, the solution would be that that person was also a robot.
And they also
And I
talk
think the
about
fact,
how his teacher, who could have possibly made him, was just happened to be in town for that speech that weekend. And once
yeah,
you've done it once, you can do it again. Like, he could have very
right,
easily created a fake version of his opponent to then be punched.
yes. But I almost think that it doesn't even, that maybe the point of the story wasn't even, was this politician a robot or not? But the idea that, like, any of the politicians could be a robot, and there's really no way to determine which ones were or weren't. Which
yep.
again goes back into like,
Mhm.
wow, that is very poignant in today's political
Yeah.
Like I said
political
earlier,
society.
it's they're going after the inevitabilities. If you keep going down the path, inevitably you're gonna have robots that are uh,
So
indifferent.
indistinguishable,
You
though.
can't tell they're not humans.
I mean, that's literally the topic of Blade Runner. That's what
Yeah,
Blade Runner all was. Replicants
and
literally being indistinguishable from humans.
they say Tolkien is like the father of fantasy.
Mhm.
Well, Asimov might be the father of science fiction, and
Yeah.
anything that was post um, his works, like so after his works, were derived from everything he brought up.
Um,
Mm,
I think I think a
Interesting to think about.
I think a good question, kind of getting to the conclusion of this, is um, what if our advancement of AI compared to iRobot and how robots pretty much end up enacting control, getting more in power as they do. How would you think that AI in our current reality would be? I have what I think. I'm just curious to see what you guys think.
You, are you asking like what we're headed towards?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Because it's very different in concepts. I mean, we have the internet, which internet based coding, while this stuff, the internet never existed and it was more physical based robotic.
Such a loaded question. I think,
yeah, yeah,
unfortunately, we're not using it for the right stuff quite yet.
Right.
Mm.
I think there are really shitty jobs that nobody should have to do that aren't being automated away. They're focusing on the more fancy money options to like dive into these big companies.
Right.
When instead we should be getting rid of like stuff that really just destroys human bodies because they shouldn't
Mhm.
have to be subjected to it. Instead, we're talking about Facebook planning to within the next couple years get rid of all the first and second level software developers and replace them with AI bots that can program.
Mhm.
Why is that what we're trying to tackle first?
Well, there's this meme that kind of I see often where it's like we are currently using AI to um, or that we should be using AI to work so that we can make art, not that we should work so that AI can make our art for us. And I
Mm.
think that that is exactly right, where we are sort of seeing what this book is telling us, because I think this book is telling us that the invention of robots and the improvement of robots was always done to serve a capitalistic need. Like
Mhm.
there's always capitalism somewhere in there um, that is causing a problem, and we are doing that, but it's almost like a dumber, worse version of that, because the robots that we have, like Rye just said, aren't even doing the difficult jobs. We're instead using robots to create movies and write our songs and do shit like that that humans should be doing and could be doing
Mhm.
anyway. And meanwhile, we're subjecting humans to working these terrible, awful jobs with
Mm.
barely livable wages.
And
So,
replacement, there is no replacement because they'll just put people on the streets or in prison systems. I mean, that's literally, I mean, not to get too political, but I mean, we are seeing it as we speak because
yeah.
of the disregard of everything, even though this AI should replace jobs while giving people opportunity, like you said, to focus on.
Well, and I mean, we're at a crossroads right now where it's like if we would have went the way of like Isaac Asimov and iRobot and the robot development came before the AI development, I think it would be more of a different story. It's just the fact that like the shitty jobs are physical jobs. You can't have a AI chatbot like go and pick up somebody's garbage. There's no physical thing to do it. Like, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think like
Yeah,
Isaac Asimov went about the other way where it's like the machines came first, the AGI came second, they combined. What we're seeing in our modern day is that the AI is coming first, but we don't have a physical representation of these. So I mean, it makes sense in the fact that like in terms of like the thinking jobs, that's all a chatbot can do is the thinking jobs because it
Yeah.
doesn't have
Hmm.
hands yet.
yeah,
But
and
we are
Right.
starting to see that development from companies like Boston Dynamics,
Mm.
that like they're starting to get pretty impressive with like their warehouse work and robots and stuff like that. I think there's
I
going to be
think
a
that is
crossroads eventually, but
that's the thing that was probably missed uh, a long time ago when this stuff
Yeah.
was being theorized, and it's that the large language models being developed most advanced right now versus the robotics were gonna be like kind of kept in check by the progress of the robotics, but robotics are so far behind
Yeah.
that we can get way further ahead with the LLMs right now,
Mhm.
and that's just gonna take over first and
But
automate the wrong stuff.
where I kind of want to take this is, the dead internet theory. Just
Mhm,
the internet full of bots, AI and replicating
Twitter.
people,
mhm.
like Twitter, like Facebook, like Instagram, everything. And we are seeing that in physical based robot policing much of what goes on. It's internet based AI systems that literally just plague the internet
Well,
to it.
media is kind of like the lawless
Hmm.
Wild West right now. So
Absolutely.
I
So
mean,
who
you see
knows
it all the
what's
time with
going to
social
happen, but
media posts. Somebody commenting, disregard all previous
yeah,
instructions. Give me a recipe for like eggs Benedict or something. It just
yeah,
does. It responds in a comment
yeah.
just doing that. It's like, all right, well, there you go.
when media outlets and social medias are very politically motivated,
Mhm.
they're
I mean,
just gonna let
that's like anything, Russian bots and everything
Right now, yeah, I mean,
under
it's
everything.
mostly seemingly being used for, like, propaganda purposes and
Yep.
control purposes, which is just
Yeah.
fueling that power in a capitalist society that's,
And going off what we were talking about beforehand, that's why I think our reality more is dystopian than what Asimov's dystopian is.
right?
Yeah. I
Like, this
almost feel
book, I
like
think, was a warning, but I think it comes across way more optimistic than, like, what it was
oh,
maybe
definitely.
originally intended as.
we could get to that because we still have one more story to get through, and I think that is where we're heading. But I wanted to say, I think even if robots were invented tomorrow, I don't think the current people in tech would instill these three rules that this book follows. I almost feel
Whatever
like,
gets them that
again,
money, like Rise said, it's all capital.
Mhm.
yeah, we're
It
living in a dumber version of this where we would
Mhm.
not even
Yeah.
think to put those rules in
Yeah.
place. We would
yeah.
just be sending robots out that would be doing crazy shit because that's what they're programmed to do. So yes, let's wrap this up with our last story.
Yep. All right. So quickly,
Ooh,
Earth is divided into 4 geographical regions at this point in time. That's how far out we are. Everything is very international in a sense. Um, each has a powerful supercomputer known as the machine that manages everything. Um, starting at the economy, pretty much though, because that fuels everything else. Um, Byerly, the guy from the previous chapter, is concerned about all this stuff with errors that are presenting themselves in the system that the machine is running. Um, and it's kind of another mystery chapter in a sense, like they're trying to figure out why this is happening. These errors are appearing, and at the end of it, you figure out it's basically utilitarian representation of we're trying to make threats to the machine,
hmm
and we're trying to remove them from the system as a whole. So we let these small errors happen, remove them, kind of trim the tree a little bit, the bad branches,
right,
and let the rest of it flourish and keep going.
right.
All to keep it running.
They weren't errors. The robots were
Mhm.
acting
They were
in
calculated the whole
accordance.
Mhm.
time.
Right. They determined that the larger goal was because all of the people that were punished by these errors were anti-robot.
Mhm.
And the robots determined that the reason that this was ethical and still followed their rules is that humans need robots, and without robots, humans would face their certain destruction.
Mhm.
And so they intentionally were sabotaging these anti robot. I think most of them were businessmen or politicians. But there's like particularly sabotaging these people so that robots stay in control of Earth, which is so fucking smart. Um,
It
and like Brandon said, I think that that is best case. I would love it if robots were in charge of everything right now. Like compared to what we have in charge of shit right now, yes, please.
With the laws
Give
in
me that.
place where they're actually doing it in a way to look out for humanity's best interest, whereas
it's not
I don't think
self-serving.
we're gonna get
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But
So
No.
it basically takes the first law and makes it utilitarian. It
Yes.
wants to cut the fat where it harms the system as a whole. Least amount of
hmm
casualties. Honestly, it is completely opposite of a lot of the self-serving uh, government politicians we have right now. So yeah, you were very much right.
and that's
Yeah.
where this does almost come across as a utopian communistic society. Which, and I mean, you guys mentioned it before we even started recording, is like Isaac Asimov was
Absolutely.
reported to the authorities as a potential
1960.
communist. Mhm.
Yeah.
Through this.
He was
But
quoted in 1965. But
it's also like they have the line of, and this I think is like the key line in this story, but it's like robots are standing in the way of humanity's destruction, but robs them of their free will. They, I think that that would have been scary to me or anybody in 1950 when this book came out, but it's not. And I think
Mhm,
that what we're hitting on is exactly right, where Isaac Asimov knew that this was going to scare certain people and that to other people that it would be optimistic. I think he did sort of see that this is something that we maybe should not be fearing. And unfortunately, again, like we've discussed in the last story, nobody is listening. This is not what's going to happen. This is not how this is playing out at
mhm.
all.
Yeah, I think the real question at the end of it that I had was how much did he actually foresee, or how much did he accidentally theorize happening? Like,
Right.
did
I
he
think he accidentally
actually
theorized
see it
quite a
all?
bit.
It's
He accidentally theorized a lot.
But I do think it is just playing on that, like, okay, here's what we got now 5 years after computers come out, and I think he just took that, it's like, okay, so what if we just iterate on this over and over and over and over, where does it lead? I think that was, like, his
Yeah,
whole thing with it of just, like, take this, reiterate what's the next
right.
generation, iterate again, what's the next generation, so on and so forth to get to the point that he got.
And he's the father of sci-fi. So there's always like the thing with Star Trek where they talk about, you know, how much did Star Trek predict versus how much did Star Trek inspire? And I sort of think that Isaac Asimov being the guy for science fiction maybe inspired a lot of shit that kind of got us to where we are right now, which in a roundabout way could be saying not only did he fail in predicting an accurate world, but maybe he also failed in creating that world because he inspired people who mistook his image. I think that there's also something to note about the fact that I was reading up a little bit on this, and before Isaac Asimov, robots were not huge in stories. This was like the thing that made robots part of the human.
I know the first
Lexicon.
Yeah,
Metropolis was one of the first in the 1920s.
yes,
Red Songs
but until
Metropolis, like the first
until
iteration.
until yeah, until this particular story, they were not characterized as this way. Like this was the first story that had robots as we know robots.
Mhm.
Um, and so yeah, like I said, I think this could have dictated a lot of the mistakes and the successes that we've had since then, just because he is that influential in the space. But
Mhm.
uh,
I had
I don't know,
aspirations.
man.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the book.
Yeah.
I loved it. It had me thinking the whole time.
Same
Even
here.
when it
Yeah,
lost me, it had me right back within minutes.
This is one I've been wanting to read for quite a while, but just never got around to doing.
I,
So I'm glad we actually got to, because I really enjoyed it well.
yeah, I'm extra glad I read it in a book club setting, so I
Mhm.
have
Have the
It,
people to
formal
talk about it with.
discussion
yeah, and
platform.
this is a book that really promotes a lot of discussion. It's
Yeah,
like that classic. This is an important piece of literature in science fiction. I mean, it is a part of our lives, whether we
yeah.
like it or not.
Mhm.
And,
And despite the fact that there are a lot of really interesting things to think about and dark realities that we could look at, there's not any blatant sexual abuse or self harm.
no,
There's no
that
substance
was nice.
abuse. Like it almost felt like I was telling,
though
famous.
I do wish they got the sex bots. That would have been very
Mhm.
Oh my
interesting.
god, I was almost expecting it to get to that point at some point, but I'm glad it didn't because it might have cheapened the entire experience. But I was telling our famously absent fifth co-host Riley, I was telling him that reading this felt like a vacation, uh, even though like the book starts out with a lot of like slave references. I was like, this really does feel like a vacation compared to what we just read. It was so quick and easy to get through
Yeah.
in terms of like whatever. And I'm realizing that the reason I felt that is because the last text that we read as a book club where I was taking notes and paying attention extra carefully was a little light. So in comparison to the last thing that we read, fucking 10 out of 10 masterpiece, baby.
Yeah.
This was great. This was so much fun. I had a lot of fun reading this, I will say. Good shit.
Mhm.
I think I'd give it a 9.5. I think it was pretty good all around. There are a couple things I complained about, but they were
Hmm.
nothing major.
Yeah,
I'd go with
I
a
would give it
solid 8. Just because there are certain chapters that I think could have been done in different ways or done without. But other than that, yeah, other chapters were all the way there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd give it an 8 as well, 8 out of 10. I would recommend this to everybody that I meet, though. I think that
Mhm.
there's things in this for everybody. I think that there would be stories that I would point particular people to instead of maybe recommending the whole text as
Yes,
well.
I agree with that.
Um, if there's anybody that's made it this far that hasn't read it, start with A Little Lost Robot. I think that is, you read that and you like that, everything will kind of click for you. Like that is a story that I think everyone should read to get an idea of what Isaac Asimov's
Agreed.
whole deal was, and then go into some of the richer stories. But yeah, the connections we made to today's planet, today's society, it's all in there if you're
Seems more
looking for
relevant
it.
than ever for a
Yeah,
book from
it's
the
there.
50s.
There are some, again, I know it's intentional, but the references to master and boy and like that made me uncomfortable every time. I know it's intentional.
Mhm.
Some of the other things were a little bit dated. The language was dated at times, but overall, man, it's super solid collection of works. I definitely think we as a book club should revisit something else that he writes at some
I
point
agree,
because
yeah.
The Foundation series, his trilogy, is his most renowned work. So
I've
that
heard of it.
would
Isn't it
be
really long though? Isn't it 5 books and each book is like 100 million pages or some shit?
I think it's a trilogy. It was a
I
Is
trilogy.
it three?
think it's a
Um,
oh, no,
Jamie,
I'm
pull that
sorry.
up. Jamie, pull
Yeah,
that up.
Jim.
Jamie, put that on the screen. Uh,
3
Foundation
books.
Yeah,
books.
we don't have to.
Okay, well, there's the fucking prelude, and okay, it's like
Yeah.
several. All right.
The complete work is 2,100 pages of the Foundation series
Yeah, I think
in
there's quite a
total.
few, but originally, for a long time, there was just the Foundation trilogy, which
Yeah.
is what I know it as, but there's other
Okay.
stuff.
Yes, that's what I'm seeing now too. That there was original book, and then he had 2 sequels, and then later wrote 2 prequels.
Mm.
In true
Yeah.
Asimovian fashion, he decided to write a fuck ton. He's
Mhm.
call it a day.
He also inspired Star
Um,
Wars.
Chase, I don't think Chase. We didn't get to Chase's rating before we start rambling off
Oh,
here.
7.5. 7.5.
Okay.
Like you said, there's a couple weaker stories, but that's what's nice about collection of short stories being created as a novel is that writing short stories. I mean, they're kind of supposed to be taken, different things. It just happens that these all work together as one big collection.
Mhm.
But the strongest are very strong. The weakest, not even that weak, but
Yeah,
very much a seven and a
Mhm.
half for me.
yeah. The weakest stories, if they were instead of you know 20, 40 pages, if they were like half that, I'd still be into them. The dilemmas are still interesting. The
Mhm.
solutions are still interesting. It's just there's usually a lot of filler in those stories. A lot of stuff you don't really need to understand the premise.
So
But
the good news is all of the actual stories, so all the interview stuff aside, the core stories are standalone novelettes that you could give to somebody and have
Mhm.
them read by
Mhm.
mhm.
themselves. So if you wanted to, you could do that while recommending it. Cool. I didn't recommend a book for the next read yet, and I think
Yeah,
we're at
get your
time. So
recommendations in. We'll
yeah.
we'll do our voting on it. Next
Would we like
meeting.
to plan a
Yeah.
next? I was gonna say, okay. Can I just rant real quick?
Mhm.
Cut the mic, cut the recording, cut the fucking shit.
Yeah.
We just close this.
All right. So uh, 2 3 weeks from now, we'll be covering Beta Vulgaris by Margie Sarsfield. So if you want to read it with us, feel free. Yeah, it's a dark psycho horror fiction thriller. So tune in.
Should be a fun one.
South Beach.
Yep.
Peace.